The suburbs have a sound. It's a low, unassuming hum, a symphony of distant lawnmowers, the gentle whir of sprinkler systems, and the cheerful, almost mocking chirp of birds that have never known a single day of hardship. In Maple Creek Estates, that sound was sacred. It was the audible equivalent of beige vinyl siding and perfectly spaced petunias. And on that particular Tuesday morning, I was soaking in it. I sat on my back patio, a warm mug of coffee cradled in my hands, watching my cat, Mittens, engage in a life-or-death struggle with a rogue oak leaf. Mittens, a creature of such profound fluffiness that she occasionally tipped over from the sheer weight of her own fur, was not a natural-born killer. Her strategy consisted of batting the leaf, getting startled when it moved, and then retreating to a safe distance to glare at it. It was riveting stuff. My other cat, Bartholomew, a sleek black cat who carried himself with the quiet dignity of a disgraced duke, was sunbathing on a patio chair, utterly unimpressed. This was my kingdom. A small patch of manicured grass, a patio set from Target, and two feline overlords who demanded tribute in the form of chin scratches and premium kibble. Life was good. The sacred hum was shattered by a sound that could curdle milk from 50 paces. "Mr. Henderson." I didn't need to turn around. That voice, a unique blend of nails on a chalkboard and the whine of a dying vacuum cleaner, could only belong to one person: Brenda Wexler, President for Life of the Maple Creek Estates Homeowners Association. I took a slow sip of my coffee, savoring the last few seconds of tranquility before the storm. "Brenda," I said, turning with a smile that felt like it was cracking my face. "What a lovely morning." She was standing at the edge of my property, a phantom haunting the border between my lawn and my neighbor's. She wore a visor, beige capri pants, and a polo shirt embroidered with the HOA logo. In her hand, she clutched a clipboard, her personal Excalibur. Her eyes, however, were not on me. They were locked on Bartholomew, who had committed the unforgivable sin of yawning while in her line of sight. "Your animal," she began, the word dripping with venom, "is in clear violation of HOA regulations." I glanced at Bartholomew. He was now fast asleep, his tail giving a lazy twitch. He looked about as threatening as a throw pillow. "My animal?" I asked, playing dumb. "Bartholomew, what's he done? Is there a new rule against napping with excessive cuteness?" Her lips, already a thin, bloodless line, somehow became even thinner. Bylaw 7, Section C, Paragraph 4, Nuisance Animals. All pets are to be restrained or under the direct supervision of their owner when outdoors. Your animal is unsupervised. I gestured around my patio. "Brenda, he's on a chair 10 feet from my back door. I'm right here. He hasn't moved in 20 minutes. If he makes a break for it, I'm pretty sure I can catch him before he hits the garden gnome." She was unmoved. Brenda's face was set in a perma scowl that suggested she'd once sent a strongly worded letter to God about the color of the sky and was still waiting for a satisfactory response. Direct supervision means a leash or a physical enclosure. His presence is a gateway to neighborhood decay. He could wander, he could defecate. She said the word like it was a mortal curse. "He is a gentleman, Brenda. He uses a box inside, like a civilized being." "The rules are the rules," she snapped, making a triumphant checkmark on her clipboard. The sound was like a bone breaking. "I'm issuing you a written warning. It will be in your mailbox by noon." She turned and marched away, her orthopedic sneakers squeaking with righteous fury. I watched her go, then looked back at my ferocious, decay-causing beast. Bartholomew opened one eye, gave me a look of profound indifference, and went back to sleep. The low hum of the suburbs returned, but now it sounded different. It sounded like a ticking clock, I didn't know it then, but the whisker wars had just begun. The written warning arrived, as promised, nestled between a coupon for a discount car wash and a letter from my grandma. It was printed on thick, cream-colored cardstock, bearing the gold-embossed HOA logo. It felt more like a wedding invitation than a threat. The violation was listed as felinius loiterus, a crime I'm pretty sure Brenda had invented herself. I thought that would be the end of it. Keep the cats a little closer, wave politely to Brenda, and let the whole thing blow over. Oh, you sweet summer child, I thought to myself later. I had underestimated the terrifying, laser-focused energy of a bored suburbanite with a taste of power. A week later, a second letter arrived. This one included photographic evidence. It was a grainy, zoomed-in picture of Mittens sitting on my living room windowsill. An arrow, drawn in red Sharpie, pointed to her face. The violation: intimidation of Flora. Brenda claimed in the attached complaint that my cat had been staring menacingly at her prize-winning petunias for over an hour, causing them visible emotional distress. I stared at the photo, then at Mittens, who was currently trying to fit her entire body into a shoebox. Menacing wasn't exactly in her wheelhouse. This time it came with a $25 fine. The complaints became a flood. I was fined for excessive meowing after a night when Bartholomew apparently let out a single, plaintive cry to be let in. A cry Brenda's official complaint claimed had shattered the nocturnal peace of the community. I received a warning for unsanitary conditions, complete with another photo, this time of a single strand of black cat hair found on a rose bush that bordered our properties. A single hair. I felt less like a homeowner and more like a suspect in a very boring episode of CSI. My neighbors were no help. Most of them lived in fear of Brenda's clipboard and would rather set their own houses on fire than cross her. My attempts at diplomacy were a spectacular failure. I decided to attend the monthly HOA meeting held in the community center's grim, windowless basement. I walked in to find Brenda sitting at the head of a long table, flanked by two cronies who nodded at everything she said. The other 5 attendees were scattered around the room, looking like hostages. "Ah, Mr. Henderson," Brenda said, her voice echoing slightly in the stale air. "Glad you could join us. We were just discussing the revised color palette for approved mailbox flags. Thrilling stuff." When the floor opened for new business, I stood up, cleared my throat, and made my case. I spoke reasonably. I used words like community and understanding. I presented a binder full of photos of my cats sleeping, eating, and generally being non-threatening members of society. "With all due respect, Brenda," I concluded, "you're asking me to build a kitty jail. They're cats. They like to sit in the sun. They've never once left my yard." Brenda gave me a condescending smile. "Respectfully, Mr. Henderson, your definition of yard and the community's are two different things. This is about standards. It's about protecting our property values from vagrancy." She called my cat a vagrant. Bartholomew, who had 3 different beds and refused to drink water unless it was filtered from a specific brand of bottle. He was about as much of a vagrant as the Queen of England. The board, of course, voted in her favor. I was instructed to contain my problem. But Brenda wasn't done. She was emboldened, a shark that had tasted blood. The following week, a special notice was distributed to the entire neighborhood. A new bylaw amendment was being put to a vote. It was short and brutal. All feline pets must be confined to a fully enclosed, roofed structure at all times when outdoors. It passed, of course. No one dared vote against her. But it was the fine print that turned my blood to ice. A poison pen addendum, written in dense legalese, stated that if the rule was violated more than once, The HOA had the authority to contract animal control, to have the nuisance animal removed from the property. The threat was no longer just about fines or passive-aggressive notes. It was about my cats, my family. She had crossed a line. I sat on my living room floor, the letter crumpled in my fist, while Mittens and Bartholomew rubbed against me, purring, oblivious. Brenda Wexler had pushed a peaceful man, a reasonable man, a cat-loving man, too far. She wanted a war. Fine. But she wasn't prepared for my choice of weapon. Defeat tastes like stale coffee and rage. I paced my living room, the crumpled HOA letter a testament to my failure. I had tried reason. I had tried diplomacy. I had tried being the bigger person. All it got me was a legally binding order to construct a maximum security prison for 2 furballs whose combined weight was less than a Thanksgiving turkey. "She wants a cage, Bart," I ranted at Bartholomew, who was meticulously cleaning a paw, utterly unconcerned with his impending incarceration. "A cage! You, a distinguished gentleman of leisure. It's an outrage, an insult. What's next? A tiny orange jumpsuit? Ankle monitors? It's a slippery slope, my friend. A very slippery slope." Mittens just chirped and head-butted my leg, assuming my frantic energy was a prelude to dinner. I collapsed onto the couch, fired up my laptop, and fell into a rabbit hole of despairing Google searches. How to build a catio. Soundproof a cat meow. Legal recourse against tyrannical HOA president. The results were depressing. It seemed my only option was to spend a fortune building a glorified chicken coop in my backyard. Brenda had won. Dejected, I opened the digital copy of the Maple Creek Estates HOA bylaws, a 200-page PDF of pure soul-crushing misery. I scrolled through it, my eyes glazing over at the regulations for fence height, lawn ornamentation, and the acceptable Pantone colors for front doors. I landed on the pet section again, reading the new amendment for the 10th time. All feline pets must be confined to a fully enclosed roofed structure. My eyes snagged on those 2 words. Feline pets. The document was obsessively specific about everything else. There was a whole page dedicated to dogs, listing restricted breeds, pit bulls, Rottweilers, Dobermans. It specified leash lengths, barking ordinances, waste disposal protocols. It was a canine legal codex. But for cats, there was only this new, vindictive little paragraph. And then it hit me. A thought so audacious, so magnificently unhinged, that it felt like a lightning strike to the brain. She was so focused on domestic house cats, on my little 10-pound tabby and my sleek black gentleman. But the world of felines was vast. It was a big, toothy, claw-filled kingdom. My fingers flew across the keyboard, my previous searches forgotten. Exotic pet laws, my state. Are servals legal to own? Animals that look like cats, but technically aren't. And then, the search that changed everything. Bobcat rescue near me? The screen filled with results. My state, it turned out, had surprisingly lax laws regarding the ownership of certain native wild animals, provided you had the right permits and they came from a licensed rescue. And a bobcat, Lynx rufus, was, biologically speaking, a member of the family Felidae. It was a feline. I started laughing, a low, rumbling chuckle that grew into a full-blown maniacal cackle. Mittens scurried under the couch, startled. Brenda's rule was a work of art in its petty specificity, but she'd made one fatal error. She had written a rule about feline pets, without ever considering a feline that could stare back at her with the cold, calculating eyes of an actual predator. Huh, I whispered to the empty room, a slow Cheshire grin spreading across my face. It doesn't say a single word about a Lynx rufus. Not one. She was so obsessed with a 10-pound ball of fluff, she forgot to outlaw his 30-pound, ear-tufted murder machine cousin. I was going to follow her rule, to the letter. I would build her the fully enclosed, roofed structure she so desperately wanted, but the resident wasn't going to be Bartholomew. "Brenda, you magnificent idiot," I said, raising my coffee mug in a toast. "You have no idea what you've just done." The journey from insane idea to insane reality began with a phone call that tested the limits of my cell phone provider's network and my own sanity. I found a place online called Jeb's Critter Corral and Rescue, located a 3-hour drive away in a part of the state where maps just seemed to give up and display a blank, green void. The website looked like it was designed in 1998 by someone who had just discovered the word art function. A gravelly voice answered on the 8th ring. "Jeb's." "Hi, Jeb?" I said, trying to sound confident and not at all like a suburbanite about to make the worst and best decision of his life. "My name is Alex. I saw on your website that you rescue native species. I was inquiring about a bobcat." There was a long pause, filled with the sound of what might have been a chicken getting into a fight with a metal bucket. "A bobcat?" Jeb grunted. "You got the proper state permits?" "Yes, sir. Applied online this morning. They're surprisingly easy to get." "Good. You got experience with wild critters?" I thought about the time Bartholomew managed to get a bird in the house, an event that resulted in a 10-minute Benny Hill-esque chase scene involving a broom and a lot of feathers. "Well, my cat Bartholomew once got a bird, so—" "Close enough," Jeb interrupted. "Look, this fella I got, he ain't your average house kitty. He was a nuisance animal they were gonna put down. Found him eating out of a dumpster behind a Popeyes. He don't want cuddles, he wants respect. And chicken. Mostly chicken. You bring cash." The next Saturday, I found myself driving my sensible sedan down a series of progressively smaller and more menacing dirt roads. The manicured lawns of Maple Creek gave way to tangled woods and rusty, "no trespassing" signs. I was filled with a potent cocktail of giddy excitement and the dawning, gut-wrenching horror of what I was actually doing. This was a plan concocted in a fit of spiteful rage. Now, in the stark light of day, it seemed less like a clever act of malicious compliance and more like a future episode of a true crime documentary in which I would be featured as the victim. Jeb's Critter Corral was less of a corral and more of a collection of mismatched chain-link fences, dilapidated sheds, and a profound sense of despair. Jeb himself was a towering man with a beard that looked like it might contain nesting birds and overalls that had seen better decades. "You're the Bobcat fella," he said, wiping a greasy hand on his pants before shaking mine. His grip was like a vice. He gave me the grand tour. He pointed out a depressed-looking capuchin monkey named Earl, who was mournfully eating a Cheeto, and a 2-legged raccoon that hissed at me from inside a tire. An emu with wild, primordial eyes stared at me from its pen, clearly judging my life choices. Finally, he led me to a large, secure enclosure at the back of the property. And there he was. He wasn't a cute, cuddly kitten. He was a creature of raw, condensed power. "A juvenile," Jeb said, "maybe a year old, but already 30 pounds of lean, coiled muscle. His fur was a mottled brown, his paws were the size of my fists, and the tufts on his ears made him look like a tiny, furious wizard. He was pacing back and forth, and when his piercing yellow eyes met mine, he let out a low, guttural hiss that vibrated in my chest. This was a mistake. A glorious, life-altering, potentially limb-removing mistake. Mittens looked at me with mild disdain when I was late with her dinner. This thing looked at me like it was actively calculating the fastest route to my carotid artery. I was instantly terrified, and I had to have him. I named him Winston on the spot, because he had the stern, commanding presence of a wartime prime minister who was about to send the RAF to bomb Berlin and was grimly awaiting the report. The transaction was surreal. Jeb gave me a 5-minute crash course on Bobcat ownership. He likes chicken. Don't touch his ears, don't make sudden movements. He'll mark his territory, so, get used to that smell. Good luck. He handed me a thick folder of paperwork that confirmed Winston was a legal rescue, and therefore my legal property. I handed him an envelope stuffed with an amount of cash that made my stomach clench. 10 minutes later, I was loading a very large, very reinforced crate into the back of my car. Winston was inside, and he was not happy. He threw himself against the bars, letting out a series of snarls and yowls that sounded nothing like a cat and everything like a demon being exorcised. The 3-hour drive home was the most stressful experience of my life. Every bump in the road elicited a fresh volley of demonic rage from the back seat. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, and blasted Vivaldi's The Four Seasons in a desperate attempt to calm us both down. It didn't work. I had done it. I had adopted a Bobcat. Now I just had to figure out where to put him. Winston spent his first night in my garage, still in his crate, hissing at the lawnmower. The demonic sounds echoing through the wall were a stark reminder that my brilliant plan had a very real, very toothy logistical problem. I needed to build the mandated, fully enclosed, roofed structure before I could unleash my furry agent of chaos. This wasn't a job for a weekend DIY project. This was a job for a professional. A very, very understanding professional. My first 2 phone calls to local contractors did not go well. "Hi, yes, I need a quote for a custom outdoor cat enclosure," I began with the first guy. "A catio? Sure, we do those. What are the dimensions?" "About 20 by 15 feet, and it needs a reinforced steel frame, double-layered 10-gauge chain link, a concrete footing, and a secure double-locking gate mechanism." There was a long pause. "What kind of cat you got, man?" "A big one." Click. The second contractor hung up after I used the phrase, "needs to be able to contain a 30-pound animal that can jump 12 feet. My third call was to a company called Gus's Gutter and Fence. A weary voice answered. "Gus." I launched into my spiel, expecting another dial tone, but when I finished, Gus just grunted, "I can be there in an hour." Gus arrived in a beat-up Ford pickup that looked like it had personally survived several wars. He was a man in his late 50s, with a face like a road map of every bad decision he'd ever made. He moved with a slow, deliberate energy, as if he was conserving it for a coming apocalypse. He had an unlit cigarette permanently attached to his lower lip. I led him to the backyard and handed him my frantic sketches. He looked at my drawings, then at my house. Then his eyes drifted to the kitchen window where Mittens and Bartholomew were sitting, watching us with mild curiosity. He raised a single, grizzled eyebrow. "Chain link 10-gauge, he muttered, his voice a low rumble. "Steel frame, concrete footing, roof. That's a lot of security. For a cat." I decided there was no point in lying. The truth was so much weirder, it had to be believable. "He's, an escape artist," I stammered, "and very valuable. A rare breed." Gus stared at Mittens, who at that very moment was trying and failing to get a toy out from under the couch, her fluffy hind end wiggling uselessly. "Right," he said, the corner of his mouth twitching. "A rare breed. Is this rare breed part grizzly bear?" I sighed, defeated. "Okay, look, it's for a bobcat." Gus stopped. He took the unlit cigarette from his lips, looked at it as if considering the mysteries of the universe, and then put it back. He stared at me for a solid 10 seconds. I could feel him calibrating my sanity level. Then, a flicker of something that might have been respect, or perhaps just profound amusement, crossed his face. Huh? Was all he said. Then he looked at the plans again. Okay, gonna need thicker gauge wire, and I'm charging you double for hazard pay. The construction of what I had christened the Bobcat EO became the neighborhood's premier spectator sport. Gus and his two-man crew worked for 4 days, sinking steel posts into concrete, welding a frame that looked sturdy enough to hold a T-Rex, and stretching heavy-duty chain link across the walls and roof. It wasn't a catio. It was a Cold War-era gulag. Neighbors I'd never spoken to suddenly found excuses to be in their yards, staring. I could see the curtains twitching in every window on the block. Brenda watched the whole process from her kitchen window, a smug, triumphant look on her face. She thought it was for Bartholomew and Mittens. She thought she had broken me, forced me to spend a small fortune to contain my fluffy menaces. She had no idea this fortress wasn't designed to keep my cats in. It was designed to keep her and her clipboard out. The smugger she looked, the wider I smiled. The trap was almost set. The Bobcat EO was complete. It stood in my backyard like a monument to spite, a shimmering cage of steel and defiance. Gus gave the gate a final, satisfying clang, nodded once, collected his check, and drove off without another word, leaving me alone with my fortress and the 30-pound predator still fuming in my garage. The moment of truth had arrived. Operation Release the Kraken, Suburban Edition, required some protective gear. I donned a pair of thick welding gloves, my old motorcycle helmet, and a heavy-duty leather jacket. I looked like a low-budget post-apocalyptic warrior. My heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Getting Winston from the crate into the enclosure was the most terrifying 10 seconds of my life. It involved me opening both doors, making a noise that was half prayer and half scream, and then leaping out of the way as a blur of mottled fur and fury shot past me into the Bobcat EO. He landed, spun around, and let out a yowl that was deeper and more chilling than anything that had come out of him in the car. It was the sound of a wild thing claiming its territory. He immediately began to explore, sniffing every corner, his powerful muscles moving with a fluid grace that was both beautiful and deeply intimidating. He scaled the 10-foot wall in 2 seconds flat, testing the roof with a cautious paw. The cage held. Gus was worth every penny. Now for Phase 2. I knew Brenda's schedule better than my own. Every single day at 4 p.m., she did her patrol, a slow, deliberate walk around the neighborhood, clipboard in hand, searching for violations. It was 3:55 p.m. I grabbed a book, a lawn chair, and a tall glass of iced tea. I sat on my patio just outside the enclosure and pretended to read. I tried to look casual, as if installing a Supermax prison for a wild animal in my backyard was a perfectly normal Tuesday afternoon activity. My hands were shaking so much the ice cubes in my glass were playing a frantic marimba solo. Like clockwork, at 4:01 p.m., she appeared. Brenda marched down the sidewalk, her visor pulled low. She saw the gargantuan cage and her face broke into a smirk of pure, unadulterated triumph. This was her victory lap. She thought she had won. She strode right up to my property line, ready to deliver a condescending lecture on my finally adhering to the rules. "Well, well, Mr. Henderson," she began, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "I see you've finally decided to comply with community standards. A bit over the top, don't you think, for a little—" She never finished the sentence. Winston, who had been hiding behind a large hollow log Gus had thoughtfully provided, chose that exact moment to make his grand entrance. With a single, explosive leap, he landed on a high platform built into the side of the enclosure, placing him directly at Brenda's eye level, not 10 feet away. He flattened his tufted ears, curled his lips back to reveal a formidable set of teeth, and let out a guttural, terrifying hiss that sounded like a tire exploding. The effect on Brenda was instantaneous and glorious. Her smug expression vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed mask of confusion. The confusion morphed into disbelief as her brain tried to process what it was seeing. Then came the dawning horror, her eyes widening until they looked like they might pop out of her head. The color drained from her face, leaving it a pasty, sickly white. Her clipboard slipped from her nerveless fingers and clattered onto the sidewalk. Finally, she found her voice. It wasn't a scream, it was a shriek, a high-pitched, piercing sound of pure, primal terror that probably scared birds out of trees 3 towns over. She stumbled backward, tripping over her own feet, and landed hard on the grass. She scrambled away on her hands and knees, pointing a shaking finger at Winston. What is that?" she finally managed to gasp, her voice a reedy squeak. I calmly folded down the corner of my page to mark my spot. I looked up from my book with the most pleasant, placid smile I could muster. "Oh, him?" I said, taking a sip of iced tea. "That's Winston. He's a cat. Just a cat, Brenda. A feline pet, living in a fully enclosed roofed structure just like you wanted." I gestured to the cage. "Are we compliant now?" "That is not a cat!" she shrieked, scrambling to her feet. "Biologically speaking, he is," I said cheerfully. "Family Felidae, genus Lynx, just like Bartholomew over there. They're practically cousins. Do you need me to print out his Wikipedia page for the next HOA meeting?" Brenda just stared, her mouth opening and closing like a fish, unable to form words. She had built her entire world on the unshakable foundation of rules and regulations. I hadn't broken a single one. I had simply taken her rule book and beaten her over the head with it. She sputtered one last incoherent noise, then turned and fled, running with a clumsy, panicked gait back toward the safety of her beige house. I leaned back in my chair, a feeling of profound satisfaction washing over me. Winston watched her go, then settled down on his platform, looking utterly bored. The war wasn't over, but I had just won the Battle of the Backyard, and it was spectacular. I knew the shriek would have consequences. It was the kind of sound that didn't just break the suburban hum, it summoned authorities. I had just enough time to get Winston a bowl of water and put my motorcycle helmet away before the flashing blue and red lights painted streaks across my living room wall. 2 police cars pulled up to the curb, and the neighborhood curtain twitching escalated to full-on porch standing. Brenda was waiting for them on her lawn, a mess of frantic gesticulations and high-pitched hysteria. I watched from my doorway as she pointed at my house, her voice carrying across the lawn. "A panther! A savage beast! He's going to kill us all!" 2 officers got out. The first was a man who looked like he'd been a cop since the invention of donuts. He had a magnificent mustache and an aura of weary resignation. This was a man who had seen everything and was impressed by none of it. His name tag read Miller. His partner was young, trim, and had the earnest, slightly terrified look of someone who still thought the police academy had prepared him for the reality of suburban policing. His tag read Davis. They listened to Brenda's tirade for a moment. Then Miller's tired gaze drifted over to me. He sighed the sigh of a man who desperately wished he was anywhere else, and ambled over, Davis following a step behind. "Evening," Miller said, his voice a low grumble. "Ma'am here says you're keeping a panther in your backyard." "Evening, officer," I said calmly. "First, not a panther. It's a bobcat. Second, yes, I am. Would you like to see him?" Davis looked genuinely alarmed. Miller just looked intrigued. I led them through the side gate into the backyard. They stopped and stared at the bobcat Io. Winston was on his log, calmly gnawing on a piece of chicken I'd given him. He glanced at the uniformed men, seemed to deem them uninteresting, and went back to his dinner. "Okay," Miller said, rubbing his mustache. "That is, in fact, a bobcat." "But, sir, that's a wild animal," Davis said, his hand hovering near his sidearm, as if he expected Winston to suddenly learn how to pick locks. "That's where it gets interesting," I said. I was prepared for this. I jogged inside and returned with a neat folder. "Here you go, officers. Exhibit A, my state-issued permit for the ownership of indigenous wildlife. Exhibit B, the official transfer of ownership and health documents from the licensed animal rescue where I acquired him. And finally, Exhibit C, a copy of the Maple Creek Estates HOA bylaws, specifically the new amendment requiring all feline pets to be kept in a fully enclosed, roofed structure." Miller took the folder and began to read, his expression unchanging. Davis peered nervously over his shoulder. Brenda, who had followed them, stood at a safe distance, sputtering. "He's mocking the rules! He's a menace!" she cried. Miller held up a hand to silence her without even looking up from the papers. He spent a few minutes reading everything carefully. Finally, he looked up at me, and I saw a faint twinkle in his eye. "So let me get this straight," he said, his voice deadpan. "You adopted a bobcat because your neighbor complained about your tabby?" "I'm just a law-abiding citizen, officer," I replied, trying to look as innocent as possible. "The HOA demanded a fully enclosed, roofed structure for my feline pet. I have complied, vigorously." "He's making a mockery of our safety," Brenda shrieked. Miller finally turned to her. "Ma'am, with all due respect, what law is he breaking?" "He has a tiger in his yard." "It's a bobcat. It's legally permitted, and it's in an enclosure that looks more secure than the county jail," Miller said, his patience visibly fraying. He handed the folder back to me. "Well, your paperwork is in order. The animal is contained. As far as I can tell, no laws are being broken here. This is an HOA issue, a civil matter." He turned back to Brenda, his voice firm. "Ma'am, this is not a 911 emergency. Please don't call us again unless it's actually eating someone." He gave me a long look, one that was a complex mixture of disapproval, bewilderment, and a deep, undeniable respect for my sheer audacity. He tipped his hat slightly. "Have a good night, sir. Try to be a good neighbor." As they walked away, I heard Davis whisper to Miller, "Did that really just happen?" Miller's response was a low chuckle that I could just barely hear. "Kid, you work suburbs long enough, you ain't seen nothing yet." Brenda stood there, defeated and fuming, as the police cars drove away. The law was on my side. Round 2 was mine. In the age of social media, nothing stays local for long. The story of my Bobcat-fueled feud with the HOA president exploded onto the neighborhood next-door app like a digital supernova. The platform, usually a bland landscape of lost dogs and complaints about people driving too fast, became a raging battlefield. Brenda W., verified resident. Urgent public safety warning. My neighbor on Maple Lane is harboring a dangerous wild animal. A leopard or panther. Police were unhelpful. He is a menace to our children and pets. Call the HOA and demand action. The replies came fast and furious. Gary P., verified resident. Brenda, I saw the animal. It's a bobcat, and it's in a cage that looks like it could survive a nuclear blast. Maybe calm down? Susan R., verified resident. A leopard? Oh my God, I'm keeping little Timmy inside until this is resolved. Thank you for the warning, Brenda. Anonymous. Verified resident. LMAO. Heard what this was about. The guy with the fluffy black cat? You find him because his cat was sleeping in a window. You had this coming. #Team Bobcat. The neighborhood was officially divided into 2 camps. Team Brenda consisted of her usual cronies and a handful of genuinely terrified residents who were now picturing packs of wildcats roaming the streets. Team Alex, to my surprise, was considerably larger. It was composed of everyone who had ever been on the receiving end of one of Brenda's petty violations. They saw me not as a menace, but as a folk hero, a suburban William Wallace fighting for freedom from tyranny. My newfound fame brought an unexpected visitor to my door the next evening. I opened it to find a woman about my age with a kind smile and intelligent eyes. "Hi," she said, gesturing vaguely toward the house next to mine. "I'm Sarah. I live next door. I heard the commotion yesterday, and I saw the next door post. I just wanted to introduce myself." "Alex," I said, shaking her hand. "Sorry for the circus." "Are you kidding? It's the most exciting thing to happen in this neighborhood since someone painted their mailbox taupe instead of beige," she laughed. "I'm a veterinarian, by the way. I have to admit, my professional curiosity is killing me." I found myself liking her instantly. I led her to the backyard. She approached the Bobcat EO cautiously, observing Winston with a trained eye. Winston watched her back, his ears twitching. "So, that's a bobcat," she said, her voice a mix of awe and disbelief. "In the flesh," I replied. "His name is Winston." "You do realize he's a wild animal, right? This is certifiably insane." "Is that your professional veterinary opinion?" She turned to me, a grin spreading across her face. "My professional opinion is that he seems healthy, if a bit stressed, and your enclosure is surprisingly solid. You've even got vertical enrichment spaces. I'm impressed." She paused. "My personal opinion is that you are my new favorite person. Brenda once tried to fine me because my welcome mat was half an inch too wide. An alliance was born. Sarah became my co-conspirator and official Bobcat consultant. She gave me tips on his diet, less store-bought chicken, more specialized raw food, helped me source better enrichment toys, and was generally a voice of calm, amused reason in my chaotic world. A friendship, one that felt like it could easily be something more, began to blossom over the shared absurdity of it all. Meanwhile, Brenda was not taking her defeat lying down. Her humiliation had only hardened her resolve. She started a petition to have Winston declared a public nuisance. She called emergency HOA meetings that no one attended. She spent hours poring over the bylaws, searching for a new loophole, a new clause she could use to smite me. The war was far from over. Brenda Wexler was reloading. Brenda's final, desperate gambit was to call an emergency all-hands HOA meeting. The flyer, delivered to every house and printed in a font usually reserved for declarations of war, announced the sole agenda item: an emergency vote on Bylaw 18, Section F, the prohibition of non-domesticated feline species. It was a law written specifically for me. She was coming directly for Winston. The meeting was held on a Thursday night in the same dreary community center basement. This time, however, the room wasn't empty. It was packed. Team Brenda and Team Alex had come out in force. The air was thick with tension and the smell of stale coffee. Brenda stood at a podium at the front of the room, looking severe and determined. Sarah sat next to me, offering quiet support and occasionally whispering sarcastic commentary about Brenda's pantsuit. Brenda began with a dramatic, fear-mongering speech. She painted a picture of a neighborhood under siege, of children snatched from swing sets and poodles devoured on their morning walks. "And this beast," she thundered, pointing a trembling finger in my general direction, "this creature of the wild could tear through that fence at any moment. It is a ticking time bomb of claws and fury." She then introduced her star witness, a man from County Animal Control named Barry. Barry looked miserable. He was a small, sweaty man who was clearly uncomfortable being the centerpiece of Brenda's crusade. He mumbled a few bland, non-committal statements about how it was generally advisable not to keep wild animals as pets, then practically sprinted back to his seat, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. Then it was my turn. I walked to the podium, folder in hand. "Good evening," I began, my voice calm. "My name is Alex Henderson, and I am the owner of the ticking time bomb next door. I'm not going to give a big speech. I'm just going to state the facts. Fact 1, I am in full compliance with all state laws. Fact 2, I am in full compliance with all current HOA bylaws, including the one Mrs. Wexler herself championed. Fact 3, Winston has never, and with an enclosure stronger than her deck, will never pose a threat to anyone." The room was murmuring, the crowd still divided. I could feel the vote teetering on a knife's edge. I needed something more. And then, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize. "It's Gus, the contractor. Figured you might need this. Good luck." Below the message was a link. I clicked it, and my phone's screen filled with a live video feed from a camera pointed directly at the Bobcat EO. That magnificent, grizzled bastard had installed a security camera for me. An idea, as brilliant and unhinged as the one that started this whole mess, sparked in my mind. "If I may," I said to the room, "I'd like to present a live character witness statement." Before Brenda could object, I connected my phone to the room's projector. The image of the Bobcat EO filled the large screen behind the podium. At first, the crowd was unimpressed. Winston was just sleeping on his platform, looking like a slightly oversized, grumpy house cat. "Behold the fury," I said dryly. Brenda scoffed. "It's docile now, but it's a trick." Then something magical happened. The cat door leading from my house into the enclosure's small, outer safety vestibule swung open. Bartholomew, my distinguished gentleman, sauntered out. He wasn't in the main enclosure, but separated by a layer of chain link. He hopped onto a small stool I'd left out there, sat down, and simply stared at Winston. The two cats, one domestic and pampered, the other wild and formidable, sat a few feet from each other. The savage beast opened its yellow eyes, looked at Bartholomew, and let out a massive, jaw-cracking yawn before laying its head back down on its paws. The ultimate display of feline indifference. The tension in the room broke. A few people chuckled, then a few more. Within seconds, the basement was filled with laughter. My ticking time bomb had been neutralized by a sleepy house cat. Brenda's entire fear-mongering campaign had just been rendered utterly ridiculous. "This is a trick," Brenda shrieked, her voice cracking. "He's lulling you into a false sense of security." But it was too late. Her credibility was shot. "Heck," a man in the back row shouted. "My wife's chihuahua is more aggressive than that thing." The vote was called. The motion to ban non-domesticated feline species was defeated by a landslide. Brenda stood at the podium, her face pale, her reign of terror officially over. She had been publicly, comically, and completely humiliated. As the meeting adjourned and people patted me on the back, I saw her slip out a side door, her clipboard left abandoned on the table. In the quiet aftermath of the HOA meeting, the neighborhood changed. The low hum of suburban life returned, but it felt less tense, more relaxed. Brenda Wexler's power had been built on a foundation of fear and intimidation, and when the neighborhood chose laughter over fear, her entire structure crumbled. She became a ghost. We no longer saw her on her 4 p.m. patrols. Her perfectly manicured petunias began to look a little neglected. She resigned as HOA president via a terse, one-sentence email. A month later, a "for sale" sign appeared on her lawn. Victory was quiet, and it was sweet. With the war won, however, a new reality began to set in. I'd sit on my patio and watch Winston pace the length of his enclosure. He had toys, good food, and a safe environment, but he also had a wildness in his eyes that my backyard could never satisfy. He'd stare at the tops of the trees beyond my fence, his tail twitching, a yearning for something I couldn't give him. Sarah and I talked about it one evening, sitting on the patio steps. Bartholomew was asleep on my lap. "You know you can't keep him forever, right?" she said gently, stating the thought that had been growing in my own mind. "I know," I sighed, scratching Bart behind the ears. It was a means to an end, an incredibly fluffy, slightly terrifying end. He did his job. He broke the queen. Now he deserves a kingdom. Keeping him had been about winning the fight, about proving a point, but the fight was over. Now it had to be about what was right for Winston. Sarah, with her veterinary connections, was a miracle worker. She spent a week on the phone, calling in favors and vetting organizations. She found a place, not a roadside zoo like Jeb's, but a highly regarded, accredited wildlife sanctuary in the mountains a few states over. It was a place with acres of natural, wooded habitat, where rescued native predators could live out their lives in peace and safety. It was perfect. The day the sanctuary team came was bittersweet. They were professionals, calm and efficient. They sedated Winston gently and prepared him for transport. As they carried the crate to their van, I reached in and, for the first and only time, stroked his thick, mottled fur. He was magnificent. He was the agent of my ridiculous suburban chaos, and I felt a genuine, strange affection for him. I had adopted a bobcat to spite my neighbor, but somewhere along the way, I'd come to respect the wild, untamable spirit of the animal himself. I owed him this, a real home. Months passed. The for sale sign on Brenda's lawn was replaced by a sold sign. A nice, quiet family with a golden retriever moved in. The new HOA president was a reasonable woman who thought the approved mailbox flag colors were a bit much. Life in Maple Creek Estates returned to normal, or rather, a new, weirder normal. I had become a minor local legend. People I didn't know would wave to me at the grocery store. The neighborhood kids referred to my house as the Bobcat house, and not a single person ever again complained about Bartholomew or Mittens sunbathing on the patio. Sarah and I were now a couple. Our evenings were spent on my patio, no longer plotting against a petty tyrant, but just enjoying the quiet hum of the suburbs. One afternoon, a postcard arrived in the mail. It was from the wildlife sanctuary. On the front was a stunning, professional photograph of a bobcat perched on a rocky outcrop, looking regal and majestic against a backdrop of pine trees. It was Winston. Sarah read the message on the back aloud. "Winston is doing great. He has fully acclimatized to his new habitat and has successfully asserted dominance over a particularly stubborn badger. Thanks again for everything." I took the postcard and smiled. "That's my boy," I said, "fighting the good fight." I tacked the picture up on the fridge, a permanent reminder of the strangest few months of my life. Sarah leaned against me, her head on my shoulder. "Just promise me no more wild animals, okay? The new HOA president seems nice. I don't think you need to adopt an alligator to protest the Petunia selection for the front gate." I laughed, wrapping an arm around her. "An alligator? Don't be ridiculous," I said, a familiar, mischievous glint returning to my eye. "Their permitting is a nightmare." I paused for effect. "But you know, I was reading about capybaras the other day. Apparently they're very sociable." Sarah groaned, but I could see she was smiling as she playfully shoved me. The sun was setting. Bartholomew and Mittens were snoozing at our feet, and for the first time in a long time, the neighborhood was completely, perfectly at peace.